Hi grade ones, it's Mrs. Packard here, and I am back to read to you The Wild Robot. Now, when we left off, Mrs. Proby was reading the last few chapters to you, and for my students in my class, we actually left off at chapter 30. So if you're joining us from my class and you're ready to pick up right where we left off at school, then you can start with this video. If not, you can go back and watch some of the readings done by Mrs. Proby and Miss Craddock and Mrs. Gorick. But today we're going to start with chapter 30 of The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. And chapter 30 is called The Nest. I've built my fair share of lodges over the years. Mr. Beaver stood at the water's edge. But I can't say I've ever built one for a robot and a gosling. So just what exactly do you need? We need a lodge big enough for us both, said Roz. It should be comfortable and safe, and it should be near the pond. How long do you plan on living in this lodge? I do not know. Then we better make sure it's strong and sturdy. Mr. Beaver stroked his whiskers as he thought, do you plan on having friends over? The missus loves to entertain guests. I do not have any friends. No friends? Well, you seem pretty likable for a monster, robot. But if you want my advice, you should grow yourself a garden. Your neighbors won't be able to resist fresh herbs and berries and flowers. Just you wait and see. So we'll make sure there's a place for a garden, and we'll give your lodge some extra space for all the friends you'll be hosting. The beaver winked. We all need to find a way to keep your lodge comfortable when it's cold outside. Our lodge is heated by our own bodies, but I think we'll have to find another way to heat yours. The beaver and the robot thought about heat for a while. The first thing that came to Roz's mind was the sun. Then she remembered the hot sparks she had felt while sliding down the mountain peak. I could heat our lodge with fire, she said. Mr. Beaver blinked his eyes. I will need to experiment, Roz continued, but I think there is a way. You go right ahead, Roz, said the beaver, but would you try not to burn down the entire forest? Don't worry, I'll be careful. Let's move on, Mr. Beaver sighed. The next order of business is to find a site for your lodge. That meadow across the water would be perfect. But the hares will have a fit if we try to build there. I think we should clear out some trees and build right in the forest, and I know just the place. The beaver took them along the water and up to a dense section of forest that jutted into the pond. It needs some work, said Mr. Beaver, trudging through the thick weeds, but this ought to do the job. Yes, this ought to do the job, said Roz in her friendliest voice. Job, said Bright Bill. Mr. Beaver was incredibly skilled at taking down trees, but even he couldn't keep up with Roz's powerful chopping hands, so he let the robot do all the hard work. He pointed out the trees and shrubs that needed to go, and Roz started hacking away. By sunset, they were standing on a nearly cleared site, and they had more than enough wood to build the lodge. You did some fine work today, Roz, Mr. Beaver yawned. I'll return in the morning, and we'll pick up right where we left off. What would you like me to do? Said the robot. Tonight? So you still feel like working, do you? Very good. Well, you can start by digging out these tree stumps, and you can collect all those large flat stones over there. And you can smooth down this patch of dirt so we have a level place to build. That should keep you busy. The next morning, Mr. Beaver returned to find that Roz had been very busy indeed. All the tree stumps had been dug up and their holes filled in with dirt. 20 large stones had been stacked, and the ground was now perfectly level. But what most astonished Mr. Beaver was that Roz and Bright Bill were huddled around a small, crackling campfire. Mr. Beaver moved his lips, but no words came out. Bright Bill was cold last night, said Roz, so I taught myself how to make a fire. But But how? I discovered that when I strike two stones together, they create sparks like this. I directed sparks onto dry leaves and wood until they ignited. Once I had a fire, it was easy to keep going. If I need to put it out, I can just add water. Mr. Beaver sat and warmed his paws. I've never seen fire in such a neat little bundle. He stared into the flames. I've only seen it blazing through the forest, burning everything in its path. But this is marvelous. He took another minute to enjoy the warmth. Then he and the robot got back to work. Mr. Beaver asked Roz to dig a trench here, to place large stones there, to arrange logs this way, to smear mud that way. Birds and squirrels perched in the trees and watched the new lodge take shape. It resembled the Beaver Lodge, but it was larger, a great dome of wood and mud and leaves. A simple opening in the wall served as the entrance, and the door was nothing more than a heavy stone that the robot could slide out of the way. And here is a picture of the Beaver Lodge. Now, the neat thing about beaver lodges is beavers are very smart when they build their lodges, and they often build them underneath or on top of the water. And when they make their entrances, they often make their entrances under the water so that they can hide and get away quickly from their predators. So beavers are very smart animals when they build their homes. Inside the lodge was one big round room. The arched ceiling was high enough that Roz could stand upright. A fire pit was set into the center of the floor, and a mesh of thin branches above acted as a vent. Long stones lined the interior walls like benches and were covered with thick cushions of moss. There was even a hole for storing food and water for Brightbill. "You've got yourself a beautiful pond property," said Mr. Beaver. "What are you going to name it?" "I do not understand." "Well, why, a beautiful lodge like this deserves a name. We call our lodge Streamcatcher." The robot's computer brain didn't take long. "The lodge is for Brightbill. Brightbill is a bird. Birds live in nests. Could we call the lodge the Nest?" "Huzzah!" squeaked the beaver. "The Nest is a fine name for your lodge." "Nest! Nest!" laughed Brightbill. They stood outside the nest and admired their handiwork until Mr. Beaver's belly began to grumble. "That sound means it's time for me to get to dinner." "Thank you very much for your help," said Roz. "We could not have done this without you." "You're quite welcome," said Mr. Beaver, smiling. "For your garden, you'll want to speak with Tawny, the doe who lives over the hill. She'll know just what to do. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have to hurry home before Paddler eats the best leaves. Enjoy your first night in the nest." Chapter 31 is called The First Night. The stars were out. A fire was crackling in the fire pit. Roz and Brightbill were settling into their first night in their new home. "The lodge is where we will live from now on." The robot plucked her son from his little woven nest and placed him on the floor. "I hope you like it." The gosling did like it. He liked that it was big and warm and peaceful. And he liked knowing that the forest and the pond were just outside. He waddled around, peeping to himself and exploring every little corner of the lodge until it was time for bed. His mother carefully laid him on a soft cushion of moss, but he didn't want to sleep there. So she put him back in his little nest, but he didn't want to sleep there either. Brightbill looked up and said, "Mama, sit." Roz sat down. Then he said, "Mama, hold." Roz held him. The robot's body may have been hard and mechanical, but it was also strong and safe. The gosling felt loved. His eyes slowly winked closed, and he spent the whole night quietly sleeping in his mother's arms. Chapter 32 is called The Deer. The deer family did not run from the sound of snapping twigs and crunching leaves. They had heard all about Roz and Brightbill, and they knew there was nothing to fear. Crown Point stood before his doe and his 3 spotted fawns, and the family watched as the robot approached with the gosling on his shoulder. "Hello, my name is Roz, and this is Brightbill. We are looking for a doe named Tawny." Crown Point moved aside, and the doe silently stepped forward. "Mr. Beaver helped us build a lodge," said Roz, "and he thought you might help us to grow a garden." "Mr. Beaver helped you?" came Tawny's gentle voice. "You must have done something for the beavers." "I brought them freshly cut trees," said Roz. Tawny looked at Crown Point, and the buck slowly nodded. "I will help you grow a garden," said the doe to the robot, "if you will let my family eat from the garden." The robot nodded in agreement. Then she silently led Tawny back to the nest. And there's a picture of the deer family. Chapter 33 is called The Garden. After inspecting the grounds, Tawny asked Roz to remove all the dried brambles and weeds and leaves from the garden area. She asked her burrowing friends, the moles, the groundhogs, to dig through the dirt and loosen the soil. And then she asked all the neighbors to do something rather peculiar. "Please leave your droppings around the nest. The more droppings, the richer the soil, the healthier the garden." As you can imagine, Tawny's requests got everyone's attention. What are droppings? Does everybody know what droppings are? That's like poop. The place was soon crawling with woodland creatures, curious to hear more about the garden project. And just like that, the robot was meeting her neighbors. The plan to help her make friends was already starting to work. There was a festive feeling around the nest that day. Animals were coming and going and chatting and laughing. After some pleasant conversation, each neighbor would choose their spot, leave their droppings, and be on their way, and always with a smile. "We're happy to help," said 2 smiling weasels after finishing up their business. "It was our pleasure," said a flock of smiling sparrows before they blew away. "Shouldn't be much longer now," said a smiling turtle as he slowly made his contribution. As all this was going on, Roz walked around and thanked everybody. "I am not capable of defecating," she explained, "so your droppings are most appreciated." Once the grounds were fertilized, it was time for plants. Tawny brought Roz and Brightbill out to the lush meadow. The robot sank her fingers into the ground and felt the spongy layer of roots below the grass. Slowly, carefully, she rolled up wide strips of sod, exposing the dark, wormy soil. She carried the rolls back to the nest and spread them out to make a patchy lawn. Then she transplanted clumps of wildflowers and clovers and berries and shrubs and herbs until the nest was surrounded by a scraggly collection of plants. "It's not much fun to look at now," said Tawny, "but the grass will grow in these gaps, and the flowers and bushes will perk up in a few days. I'll return soon to make sure it's all taking root. Before long, this will be a lovely wild garden." And chapter 34 is called The Mother. There's a picture of Roz and Brightbill, and as you can see, it looks like all of that poop was working as fertilizer because the plants are growing and the flowers are growing. Like most goslings, Brightbill followed her mother everywhere. She was a slow, tottering little thing, but Roz was rarely in a hurry, and together they loved meandering along the forest paths and around the banks of the pond. However, they spent most of their time right in their own garden. You see, the garden was no longer scraggly, thanks to the robot's careful attention. It was now bursting with colors and scents and flowers. Clearly, Roz was designed to work with plants. "Oh, Roz, you've been busy," said Tawny, as her family grazed on the wonderland of growing things. "This garden is glorious. You'll be seeing quite a lot of us around here." Tawny meant what she said. Each morning, around daybreak, Roz and Brightbill would hear quiet footsteps around outside the nest, and there would be Tawny and Crown Point and their fawns, Willow, Thistle, and Brook, happily nibbling on the garden. The deer weren't the only regular visitors. The beavers became quite fond of gnawing on a certain hardy shrub at the edge of the garden. Dig Down, the old groundhog, popped up to munch on the berries. Broadfoot, the giant bull moose, came to chew on tree shoots. And of course, bees and butterflies were there every day, happily floating through the flowers. There always seemed to be friendly animals hanging around the garden. It was amazing how differently everyone treated Roz these days. Animals who once ran from the robot in fear now stopped by the nest just to spend time with her. The neighbors smiled and waved whenever Roz and Brightbill wandered past. And at the dawn truce, the other mothers were eager to share their parenting advice. "Make sure Brightbill gets plenty of rest. A tired gosling is a cranky gosling. When the wind starts blowing from the north, you must get Brightbill to safety. North winds always bring bad weather. You'll never be the perfect mother, so just do the best you can. All Brightbill really needs now is to know you're doing your best." No gosling had ever had more attentive mother. Roz was always there, ready to answer her son's question, or to play with him, or to rock him to sleep, or whisk him from danger. With a computer brain packed full of parenting advice and the lessons she was learning on her own, the robot was actually becoming an excellent mother. Chapter 35 is called The First Swim. "Good afternoon, you two," said Ludwig as she waddled into the garden. "Remember me, Brightbill?" "Ludwig, Ludwig!" "Very good," the old goose giggled. "Now, Roz, do you know what tomorrow is? Tomorrow's swimming day, the day when all the parents take their goslings out to the pond for the very first time, and you simply must bring Brightbill." "Swim, swim," said the gosling, shaking his tail feathers. "Brightbill can go," said Roz, "but I cannot swim. I cannot go on the pond with him. I will not be able to protect him." "Who'd have thought a big thing like you would be afraid of a little water?" Ludwig laughed. "Well, I don't worry about Brightbill. He'll be safe in our flock. And he's going to have so much fun swimming with the other goslings. We begin at sunrise, so don't be late. See you in the morning." And with that, the goose plopped onto the water and glided away. "Swim, swim," said the gosling. "Yes, Brightbill," said the robot, staring at the pond. "Swim, swim." Early the next morning, peeps and honks and splashes began echoing the calm water. Roz and Brightbill followed a trail through the fog and over to a beach that was crawling with fluffy goslings and proud parents. Roz took a few steps onto the water, and her survival instincts immediately flared up. The robot's computer brain knew that if it got water inside of her body, it could do some serious damage. And so all of the other parents began swimming across the pond, and Roz stood safely in the shallows and watched. Brightbill ran up and down the beach with the other goslings, peeping and laughing and pretending to be afraid of the tiny waves. When one wave finally pulled him in, he felt his body floating on top of the water. A big smile appeared on the gosling's face. Clearly, Brightbill was designed to swim. "Very good, Brightbill," said Ludwig as she floated past. "You're a natural." "Yes, Brightbill, you are a natural," said Roz, trying to sound like a good mother. Ludwig rounded up all the goslings and gave them a quick swimming lesson. "Remember, everyone, paddle your feet evenly to swim in a straight line. Paddle your right foot to go to the left. Paddle your left foot to go to the right." And here's a picture of Roz watching Bright Bill and all the other ducklings swimming. Try it out and join the rest of us when you're ready. Happy swimming day! Ludwig and the other adult geese calmly glided toward the center of the pond. A jumble of goslings tried to keep up with them. The youngsters jostled and splashed and peeped with excitement. Then gradually they paddled in the direction of their parents. Only Bright Bill lagged behind him. Mama, swim? Roz pointed to the flock. I cannot swim. Go have fun with the other geese. You will be safe with them. The gosling took a deep breath. Then he shook his tail feathers and paddled his feet and set out on his very first swim. He drifted too far to the left, and then he drifted too far to the right, but his feet just kept paddling until he caught up to the other goslings. Roz spent the morning watching her son swim around and around the pond, and as she watched him, she felt something like gratitude. Thanks to Bright Bill, the robot now had friends and shelter and help. Thanks to Bright Bill, the robot had become better at surviving. In a way, Roz needed Bright Bill as much as Bright Bill needed Roz, which was precisely why she felt such concern when the mood in the pond finally changed. One moment, everything was tranquil and calm, and the next moment the geese were in a panic. Something was violently splooshing through the group. It was Rockmouth, a giant, toothy pike. The fish had been a problem in the pond for as long as anyone could remember, but he'd never attacked goslings before. All the parents immediately went to protect their young. All the parents except for Roz. The robot could only stand in the shallows and watch as her son left the other geese behind and desperately swimming towards its mother. Swim to me, Bright Bill, quickly! The goslings kicked as fast as he could. But alone in the water, he made an easy target. The pond rippled as Rockmouth splashed below the surface. Mama, help! Squeaked Bright Bill. The robot was terribly conflicted. Part of her knew she had to help her son, but another part knew she had to stay out of the deep water. Her body lurched forward and backward and again as she struggled to make a decision. And then Ludwig came to the rescue. Rockmouth, don't you dare harm that little darling. The old goose fluttered over and splashed down right on top of the fish. Leave him alone. She pecked and kicked her beak and wings against the fish until he surrendered to the murky depths of the pond. Ludwig escorted Bright Bill back to the beach, and a minute later the gosling was safe in her mother's arms. Rockmouth isn't as dangerous as he seems, said the goose out of breath. But I think that's enough swimming for one day. Chapter 36, The Gosling Grows. Bright Bill soon forgot about the incident with Rockmouth, and he spent his mornings cruising along the pond with the other goslings. He was becoming a great little swimmer, and he was also becoming a great little speaker. Hello, my name is Bright Bill, he said to anyone who would listen. The gosling was small for his age, and he always would be. But he was growing bigger and stronger by the day. His increasing size was matched by his increasing appetite. He gobbled down grass and berries and nuts and leaves. Sometimes he'd snack on little insects. If it was edible, Bright Bill would eat it. And even if it wasn't edible, he might eat it anyways. Roz felt something like fright the first time he saw Bright Bill swallowing pebbles on the beach. She was holding him upside down, hoping the pebbles would fall out of his mouth when Ludwig stepped in. Put the gosling down, said the goose with a laugh. It's perfectly natural for Bright Bill to eat a few pebbles. They'll help him digest his food. But not too many, okay, little one? Like most youngsters, Bright Bill was incredibly curious. He explored the garden and the pond and the forest floor, and he would occasionally explore neighboring homes. He wandered down some hole in the ground to say to whoever was there, "Hello, My name is Brightbill. Then a long robot arm would reach in and pull the gosling back outside. Sorry to bother you, Roz would say in her friendliest voice. The mother and son slipped into a good nighttime routine. While the gosling slept, the robot might tend to the fire if it was cool out, or gently fan him if it was warm. If he woke up hungry or thirsty, Roz brought him food or water, and whenever he had nightmares, she was always there to rock him back to sleep. Chapter 37 is called The Squirrel. A small squirrel was scurrying throughout the garden. Brightbill had never seen her before. He peered out from the nest and watched her bounce across the lawn. After a minute of spying, the gosling shook his tail feathers and waddled outside. Hello, my name is Brightbill. The squirrel froze. Then she slowly turned around and began to talk. Hi, Brightbill. My name is Chit Chat, and I'm a 12-and-a-half-week-old squirrel, and I'm new around here, and your home is really big and round, and I don't understand why smoke sometimes comes out of it. Reader, I'm not quite sure how Chit Chat got enough air into her lungs to go on like that, and I'm not quite sure how Brightbill had the patience to listen. But he stood there and politely nodded as Chit Chat rambled on and on. And here's a picture of Chit Chat. And sometimes I see you waddling behind your funny-looking mother, and you seem so nice that I thought I'd come down and introduce myself. But now I'm nervous and I'm talking too much, and my name is Chit Chat. I think I said that already. There was a pleasant silence. Brightbill stood on one foot for a moment. Then the gosling took a deep breath and said, It's very nice to meet you, Chit Chat. I don't think you talk too much. I think you talk just enough, and I like you, so let's be friends. A big smile appeared on the tiny squirrel's face. For once, Chit Chat was speechless. Chapter 38 is called The New Friendship. Chit Chat wasn't speechless for long. She'd already been alive for a whole 12-and-a-half weeks, and she wanted to tell Brightbill about every exciting thing and every boring thing that had ever happened to her. And so, as the new friends played and explored and ate together, the squirrels shared their stories. I was born on the other side of the hill, and then last week I decided I was ready to build my first dray, which is what you call a squirrel nest, and now I live in that tree with the weird bump in its trunk, she said while the two of them kicked pebbles in the pond. One time a weasel chased me through the treetops until he missed a branch and fell all the way down and crashed into a bush and walked away all wobbly, and he never bothered me again, she said while the two of them crawled along a hollow log. Ew, gross! I saw you eat that ant one time, and I ate a gnat by accident, and I didn't like it at all. I mostly eat acorns and bark and tree buds, and sometimes yummy berries that grow in your garden, she said while the two of them took a snack break. But Chit Chat was as good as a listener as she was a talker, and whenever it was Brightbill's turn to speak, she'd keep quiet and hang on to his every word. Do you know who enjoyed their conversations most of all? Our robot Roz. The protective mother was never far away, and she felt something like amusement at the silly conversations she had overheard. And she felt something like happiness that her son had made such a good friend. Chapter 39 is called The First Flight. Brightbill had spent his entire life by the pond, and he was becoming very curious about what lay beyond his neighborhood. So one day his mother said to him, "Let us go for a walk, and I will show you more water than you can possibly imagine." Roz placed the gosling on her flat shoulder, and the two of them set off across the island. They marched out of the forest, crossed the great meadow, and climbed uphill until they were at the top of the island's western ridge. Before them was a grassy slope that descended all the way down to the dark, choppy waves that surrounded the island. "There's a lot of water," said the wide-eyed gosling. "I'm a good swimmer, but I'm not good enough to swim across that pond." "That is not a pond," said the robot. "That is the ocean." "I doubt any bird could swim across an ocean." Waves rolled in from the horizon. Seagulls circled above the shore. A sturdy breeze blew up the slope. Brightbill's yellow fluff had recently changed over to a coat of silky brown feathers, and he spread his feathery wings into the breeze. And then, Mama, look! For the briefest of moments, the wind lifted Brightbill off of the ground. But he quickly tipped backward and thumped onto the soft grass. I was flying, he squeaked. That was not flying, said Roz, looking back at her upside-down son. Well, I was almost flying. I'm going to try again. I have observed many birds in flight, said Roz. Sometimes they flap their wings quickly, and other times they fly without flapping at all. They spread their wings and soar on the wind. So I was soaring, said Brightbill. Almost. There, look at the seagull soaring. It seems like she is not doing anything, but if you look closer, you will notice that she is making small adjustments with her wings and tail. I think you should try adjusting your wings in the wind like her. Brightbill hopped onto a rock and opened his wings wide. The wind is pushing me backwards. Change the angle of your wings, said his mother. Let us see what happens when they slice through the air. Brightbill slowly angled his wings downward. The more he turned them, the less the wind pushed him. And just as his wings leveled off, Mama, look, she squeaked as his feet left the ground. I'm soaring, I'm flying. He hovered over for a second, rising a little higher than before, and then he sailed backward onto the soft grass again. And here's a picture. I think Roz is feeling pretty proud of her little duckling. The gosling kept hopping onto the rock and kept riding the wind and kept tumbling onto the grass until he started to find his wings, with each attempt he floated a little higher and a little longer, and finally Brightbill really did soar. He lifted high into the air and hung there floating. He turned his wings down and felt himself drop. He wiggled his tail feathers and felt himself veering back and forth. I'm a natural, he squeaked. You are doing very well, said Roz, but you need to keep practicing. And so they spent the afternoon practicing up on the ridge. Once Brightbill was comfortable soaring, he tried flapping his wings. He flapped high into the air. He flapped in straight lines. He flapped around and around in circles. A big smile appeared on the gosling's face. Clearly, Brightbill was designed to fly. I'm flying, Mama. I'm really flying. You are flying, said the robot. Very good. Brightbill was now a real flyer, but all that flying had worn him out. He lowered himself toward the ground and tumbled into the grass one last time. His landing still needed some work. Roz placed Brightbill on her shoulder and headed back to the nest. I can't believe I can fly now, Mama, said Brightbill in his sleepy voice. I wish you could fly with me. And then the gosling's words were replaced by his quiet, steady breathing. And that's the end of chapter 39. Chapter 40 is called The Ship, and Miss Craddock is going to start at chapter 40 and continue reading. I hope that you are enjoying the book so far. In these last few chapters that we read, I love how there were so many great messages, the message of friendship, and how Roz was becoming so proud of little Brightbill, and how Brightbill wanted to learn how to fly and never give up. She kept trying and trying until he was able to finally take off and get flying. So thank you for listening to me today, and I will read to you in a little while. Thank you. Bye-bye.